The light within the Aetherium Heart was fading. Elara traced the network of once vibrant sapphire veins that webbed the surface of the colossal, pulsating crystal, her touch gentle, her heart heavy with a familiar dread. For generations, her ancestors had served as keepers of this sacred relic, the fulcrum upon which the delicate balance between the mortal realm and the restless spirit wilds precariously rested. Now, under her solitary watch, its luminescence, once bright enough to banish all shadows from the sanctum, was little more than a guttering candle flame against an encroaching darkness. The sanctum itself, a hidden chamber nestled deep within the roots of the Whisperwind Peaks, felt colder these days. The air, usually thrumming with a clean, vital energy that resonated with the Aetherium Heart, was now thin and carried a faint, discordant hum like a string on a celestial harp stretched too taut. Outside these sacred walls, Elara knew the signs were even more dire. Reports from the few outlying villages that still dared to send word spoke of unnatural storms, of crops failing in fertile soil, of normally benign nature spirits growing agitated, their playful mischief turning to outright hostility. The barrier between worlds was fraying, and the Aetherium Heart, its power inexplicably waning, was the cause. Elara was the last of her line, a lineage sworn to protect and nurture the heart. Her training had begun before she could properly read, her days filled with ancient rituals, meditative practices to commune with the relic, and the memorization of lore so old it was written in a language no living tongue still spoke. She was a guardian, not a mage of great power nor a warrior of renown. Her strength lay in her devotion, her unwavering focus, and her inherited, intuitive connection to the Aetherium Heart. But devotion alone, she was beginning to fear, was not enough to mend a dying god heart. For months she had performed every ritual, chanted every ancient invocation, poured every ounce of her own meager life force into bolstering the fatting crystal, all to no avail. The sapphire veins grew dimmer, the discordant hum louder. Despair, an unwelcome guest, had begun to whisper in the quiet solitude of the sanctum. It was during one such night, when the heart's pulse felt terrifyingly weak, that Elara, combing through the oldest, most forbidden scrolls in the sanctum's small, hidden archive, found it, a reference, veiled in allegory and dire warnings, to a being of immense power, an entity imprisoned long ago for his untamable nature. The text called him the Storm Scourge, an elemental alpha of such volatile energy that his very presence had threatened to shatter the balance the Aetherium Heart was created to maintain. The ancient keepers, unable to destroy him, had instead bound him, locking his essence away in a specially constructed prison deep beneath the earth, his tomb meant to be eternal. But a barely legible footnote, penned in a shaky, spidery script by a long-dead ancestor, hinted at a desperate, last-resort contingency. Should the heart falter beyond all mending, should the veil between worlds tear, only a power equal to its own making, though wild and perilous, might reignite its core or stand as bulwark against the unraveling. But to unleash the scourge is to risk a conflagration that could consume all. A conflagration? Elara shivered. The stories of the Storm Scourge, even in their fragmented state, painted a picture of devastating, untamed fury. Yet, as she looked at the fatting Aetherium Heart, felt the encroaching chill of the weakening veil, the alternative, a slow, certain decay of both worlds into chaos, seemed no less terrible. The scrolls contained a ritual, a dangerous sequence of invocations and offerings, designed not to release the Storm Scourge entirely, but to awaken him, to call forth his consciousness, to plead for his aid. It was a gamble of unimaginable proportions. His imprisonment had lasted for untold centuries. What would remain of his sanity? Would he even listen? Or would his first act upon reawakening be to destroy the descendant of those who had caged him? For days, Elara wrestled with the terrifying choice. She was the guardian. Her duty was to protect the balance, to preserve life. But all her efforts were failing. The path laid out by her ancestors, the path of gentle nurturing and ancient ritual, was leading only to a slow demise. This forbidden text, this desperate footnote, offered another way, a path through fire and storm, fraught with peril, but holding a sliver of hope. With a heavy heart and hands that trembled despite her resolve, Elara made her decision. She would risk the conflagration. The prison of the Storm Scourge, according to the faded diagrams accompanying the ritual, lay far beneath the sanctum, in the deepest, most geologically unstable roots of the Whisperwind Peaks. No keeper had dared venture there for millennia. The passages were said to be trapped, warded, and haunted by the echoes of the elemental's rage. Elara gathered what she would need: a staff topped with a smaller, still faintly glowing Aetherium shard to light her way and offer some measure of protection, a satchel containing offerings described in the ritual, sun-dried mountain herbs that still held the memory of lightning, a piece of never-melting glacier ice, and a single, perfectly formed stormstone said to calm tempests. And finally, her own unwavering will. The descent was more terrifying than she could have imagined. The air grew thick, charged with a static energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The passages twisted like the petrified intestines of some great beast, the silence broken only by the drip of water and the distant, unnerving rumble of the earth settling around her. The Aetherium shard on her staff cast long, dancing shadows, making the rock formations look like leering, monstrous faces. Ancient wards, still potent, resisted her passage, making her skin prickle and her head ache, but the shard, a fragment of the greater heart, seemed to soothe them, allowing her to pass. After what felt like an eternity of descent, she reached it, a vast, circular chamber, its walls of black, obsidian-like rock that seemed to absorb the light. In the center of the chamber, inscribed with glowing, silver runes that pulsed with a fierce, contained power, was a massive, perfectly circular seal of an unknown, unbreakable metal. This was his prison. Elara could feel his presence now, even through the centuries of confinement and the layers of magic. It was a colossal, seething energy, a storm held in check, a volcano on the verge of eruption. It was power incarnate, raw and terrifying, but beneath it she sensed an equally profound loneliness, a rage born of endless captivity. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Alina stepped into the center of the chamber before the Great Seal. She laid out the offerings as the ritual dictated. Then, holding her Aetherium-topped staff aloft, she began the invocation, her voice, though trembling, clear and resonant in the echoing chamber, speaking the ancient words of power and supplication, words not uttered for 1,000 years. As she chanted, the silver runes on the seal began to glow brighter, hotter, their light shifting from silver to a fiery storm blue. The ground beneath her feet trembled and the air crackled with an almost unbearable pressure. The distant rumbles she had heard earlier intensified, becoming a deafening roar, as if the prisoner within was awakening, responding to her call, his ancient elemental fury stirring from its long slumber. Elara closed her eyes, focusing all her will, all her desperate hope into the final words of the ritual. She was calling forth a legend, a monster, a potential savior. She was playing with fire, with a storm that could either cleanse the world or tear it apart. And she, the last guardian, was about to stand face to face with the alpha prisoner. The final word of Elara's invocation echoed into an oppressive silence, immediately swallowed by a deafening crack that split the air and the ancient seal beneath her feet. The silver runes flared with an unbearable storm-blue intensity, then shattered, the metal of the Great Seal groaning, buckling, and then tearing apart like parchment. A shockwave of raw, untamed energy erupted from the breach, flinging Elara backwards. She cried out, her staff flying from her grasp, and slammed hard against the obsidian wall of the chamber, the impact stealing her breath. Through a haze of pain and ringing ears, she watched, mesmerized and terrified, as a column of swirling, chaotic energy, lightning, shadow, and howling wind coalesced into a maelstrom, surged upwards from the broken seal. It was a tempest contained, a miniature hurricane raging within the confines of the ancient chamber. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the chaotic energy began to coalesce further, to take form. First, eyes ignited within the storm, twin embers of molten fury, like lightning trapped in amber, burning with the rage of forgotten eons. Then, a colossal silhouette began to define itself against the raging elements, broad, powerful shoulders, a torso etched with lines of muscle that seemed carved from mountain stone, and limbs that promised devastating strength. His hair was a wild mane, the color of a thunderhead shot through with streaks of silver lightning, cascading around a face that was harsh, noble, and contorted in an expression of pure primal fury. His skin seemed to shimmer, not with scales, but with an inner energy, as if the storm still raged just beneath the surface. This was Roric, the storm scourge, the alpha prisoner unleashed. He stood well over 7 feet tall, a being not entirely human, exuding an aura of untamed elemental power that pressed down on Elara, making it difficult to breathe. For a long moment he simply stood there, his head thrown back as if tasting freedom for the first time in millennia, a silent roar of released energy vibrating through the very stone of the chamber. Then his molten amber eyes, burning with the fires of long-held resentment, snapped to Elara. "You," he rasped, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates, a sound that promised destruction. "A gnat, a mayfly, you dare to disturb my slumber, to break the seals forged by those craven worms who called themselves keepers." He moved, and it was not a walk, but the pounce of a predator, the strike of a thunderbolt. In an instant, he was before her, one massive hand, fingers tipped with nails like obsidian shards, clamping around her throat, lifting her effortlessly from the ground. Elara choked, her feet dangling, her fingers scrabbling uselessly at his unyielding grip. The Aetherium shard on her fallen staff pulsed weakly on the floor, its protective light utterly overwhelmed. "For centuries I have dreamed of this moment," Roric snarled, his face inches from hers, his breath a hot wind smelling of ozone and ancient rage. "Dreamed of tearing down these cursed walls, of finding the descendants of those who bound me and showing them the true meaning of a storm's fury." Panic, cold and absolute, clawed at Elara, but beneath it, a spark of her ingrained keeper's duty, her desperate resolve, flickered to life. "Please," she gasped, her vision starting to tunnel. "The Aetherium Heart, it's failing. The world's unraveling." Her words, choked and desperate, seemed to penetrate his rage, if only for an instant. A flicker of something, confusion, crossed his harsh features. His grip loosened fractionally, allowing her a ragged gasp of air. "Aetherium Heart," he repeated, the name a strange, unfamiliar sound on his ancient tongue. "What prattling is this? Speak sense, Nat, before I unmake you." Summoning every ounce of her courage, Elara forced herself to meet his blazing eyes. "I am Elara, the last keeper. The relic my ancestors guarded, the one that maintains balance between the mortal realm and the spirit wilds, is dying. Its light fades, the veil thins, chaos seeps into the world." She gestured weakly with her free hand towards the offering she had laid out, now scattered by the force of his awakening. "The ancient scrolls, they spoke of you, of a power that might reignite its core. A last resort." Roric stared at her, his expression unreadable, though the inferno in his eyes lessened by a fraction. He could feel it now. She sensed the wrongness in the air, the thinned magic of the world beyond his prison, the faint, sickly pulse of the distant Aetherium Heart. His elemental nature, even after centuries of confinement, was still attuned to the planet's lifeblood. "The balance," he murmured, his voice losing some of its serrated edge, now laced with a dawning, grim understanding. "They let it fail, those arrogant fools who thought they could chain a storm yet could not even maintain their own precious bauble." A harsh, bitter laugh escaped him. "So the descendants of my jailers now come crawling, seeking the aid of the monster they caged." "There was no one else," Elara whispered, tears of pain and desperation welling in her eyes. "The rituals no longer work. My power is insufficient. You are the only hope left." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, not just as a symbol of his captors, but as a small, desperate creature. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, but also a core of unyielding steel. He saw the fading light of the Aetherium shard on her fallen staff, a pale reflection of the greater heart she spoke of. He saw the truth of her desperation. The weight of centuries of unjust imprisonment, of solitude, of impotent rage, warred within him against the elemental imperative to exist within a world that was, at its core, balanced. His storm essence recoiled from the cloying wrongness he now fully sensed seeping from the world above. "Hope," Roric finally said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He slowly lowered Elara until her toes brushed the ground, though his grip on her throat remained a potent reminder of her fragility. "And what makes you think I would offer it, even if I could? Why should I mend a world that saw fit to bury me alive for the crime of merely being what I am?" His eyes narrowed. "Perhaps I should let it all crumble. Perhaps a world remade from chaos would be more to my liking." Elara's heart sank. This was the resentment, the wildness the texts had warned of. He was not a savior. He was a force of nature, beautiful and terrible and utterly amoral in his current state. Because even a storm needs a sky to rage in," she said, the words coming to her in a flash of desperate inspiration. "If both worlds unravel, what becomes of your power, your essence? Will you be king of nothing but dust and echoes?" She saw a flicker in his eyes, a barest hint that her words had struck a chord, however small. "The ancient keepers were wrong to imprison you. They feared what they didn't understand. I am not them. I don't seek to control you. I seek an alliance. Your power, guided by the heart's needs, could restore the balance. In return." "In return," he prompted, his grip still a threat. "Your freedom," Elara stated, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "True freedom, not just from this prison, but freedom in a world that is whole, a world where your power might once again have a place, a purpose, beyond mere destruction or confinement." Roric was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on her, the elemental energies around him swirling less violently now, though still potent. He was considering her, the impossible bargain she offered. He, the storm scourge, allied with a keeper. The irony was as bitter as ash. "You are either exceptionally brave, little gnat," he said at last, his voice a low growl, "or exceptionally foolish." He released her throat abruptly. Elara collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, rubbing the bruised skin. Roric turned from her, packing the confines of his newly broken prison, his immense power a restless, crackling aura around him. "Show me," he commanded, his back still to her. "Show me this dying heart your ancestors cherished more than they valued respect for true power. Show me the world they have broken with their fear." He turned his head slightly, his amber eye glinting in the dim light. "And then we will speak of alliances, and of what price your hope truly entails." Elara pushed herself to her feet, her limbs still trembling from Roric's manhandling and the raw elemental power that thrummed in the air around him. He stood like a thunder god of old, his wild energy barely contained, his amber eyes burning with the accumulated fury of centuries. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her duty as keeper and the desperate hope that he was the world's last chance warred against it. "This way," she said, her voice a little breathless but firm. She retrieved her fallen staff, its Aetherium shard now pulsing with a nervous, erratic light, as if reacting to Roric's overwhelming presence. "The sanctum of the Aetherium Heart is above." Roric gave a guttural sound, something between a scoff and a growl. "Above? You mean your ancestors were foolish enough to place their precious balance closer to the very surface world they so clearly failed to manage?" Yet he made no move to stop her as she turned and began to lead the way out of the shattered prison chamber, back up the treacherous, winding passages. The ascent was a torment of a different kind. If the descent had been filled with the dread of the unknown, the return journey was dominated by the oppressive, crackling aura of the being who followed her. Roric moved with a surprising silence for one so large, yet his presence was an almost physical weight at her back. Elara could feel the raw power radiating from him, like the air before a lightning strike. She dared not look back too often, focusing on navigating the ancient, crumbling tunnels, the light from her staff casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with his untamed energy. "This mountain groans," Roric rumbled from behind her, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. "The stone is sick, the air is thin, poisoned. What have your kind done to this world in my absence?" "It is the failing of the Aetherium Heart," Elara explained, her voice tight as she navigated a particularly unstable section of the tunnel, loose scree clattering into the darkness below. "Its light dims, and so the veil between our realm and the spirit wilds weakens. The energies become unbalanced. Life withers." "Unbalanced?" he repeated, the word laced with bitter irony. The keepers who spoke so piously of balance, yet they chained the very storm that could have scoured such weakness from the world. They chose stagnation over true, vibrant chaos. Elara flinched at his words but pressed on. Arguing with a being of his power and ancient resentment seemed futile, especially in these confined spaces. Her only hope was to show him, to make him feel the desperation that had driven her to seek him out. As they climbed higher, the oppressive atmosphere of the deep earth began to lessen, replaced by the faint, discordant hum she recognized from the sanctum. The air grew colder, but it was a dead cold, not the crisp chill of mountain heights. Roric, she sensed, felt it too. His steps, if possible, grew even heavier, his silence more charged. They finally reached the hidden entrance to the sanctum, concealed behind a rockfall that Elara had long ago learned to navigate. She pushed aside a loose boulder, revealing the narrow opening. "This is it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The sanctum of the Aetherium Heart." Roric paused at the threshold, his massive frame filling the opening. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring, his expression unreadable. Then, with a grunt, he pushed past her and into the sacred chamber. Elara followed, her heart pounding. She had seen the sanctum every day of her life, but seeing it now, through what she imagined were his eyes, it seemed terribly fragile, pathetically dim. The once brilliant sapphire veins of the Aetherium Heart pulsed with a weak, flickering light, casting long, sorrowful shadows across the ancient, carved walls. The air was cold, the vital thrum she had grown up with now a mere whisper. Roric stood before the colossal crystal, his head tilted, his wild mane of thundercloud hair brushing his powerful shoulders. He was utterly still, yet the storm within him felt more potent than ever. He raised a hand, his long fingers tipped with their obsidian-like nails, and reached out not to touch the heart but to hover inches from its surface. Elara held her breath. A low hum emanated from him, a sound that resonated deep within the failing crystal. The Aetherium Heart responded with a flicker, a brief surge of sapphire light before dimming even further as if the effort was too much. It feels your power, Elara whispered, awestruck and terrified. Roric slowly lowered his hand. It feels death, he corrected, his voice devoid of its earlier rage now holding a strange, hollow quality. It is starved, its energies are plundered. He turned to her, his amber eyes narrowed. This is not mere decay, Keeper, this is a wound. Something or someone is actively draining its essence. Elara stared at him, shocked. Draining it, but how? Who would do such a thing? The sanctum is shielded, hidden. Shields can be bypassed, secrets can be betrayed, Roric said, his gaze sweeping the chamber, lingering on the ancient wards carved into the walls, many of them now faded and cracked. Your ancestors were skilled in binding, but perhaps less so in true, enduring protection against insidious threats. He walked around the Aetherium Heart, his movements now less like a predator and more like an ancient scholar examining a dying patient. The imbalance you spoke of. It is not just the veil between worlds fraying. It is a siphon drawing the life from this relic and from your world with it. He stopped, his back to her. The ritual you performed, it spoke of reigniting its core or standing as a bulwark. Against what precisely did your ancestors' footnote suggest I be a bulwark, little keeper? Elara's mind raced. The scrolls had been vague, speaking of the unraveling. She had assumed it was a natural decay, a consequence of time or a forgotten flaw in its creation, but a deliberate draining, the thought was horrifying. The texts only spoke of the heart faltering, of the veil tearing, she said, her voice trembling slightly. They offered no culprit, only a desperate solution, your awakening. Roric turned, a grim understanding dawning in his eyes. So they woke the storm to fight a shadow they could not even name. He looked at the Aetherium Heart again, and for the first time Elara saw something akin to sorrow in his expression, a shared grief for this dying source of magic. His own long imprisonment, she realized, was a tragedy mirrored in the heart's slow demise. Both were victims of a long-forgotten conflict, or a persistent, hidden enemy. If it is being drained, Elara said, her voice gaining a desperate edge, then stopping the drain is the first priority. Can you sense the source? Can your power trace it? He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air around him crackled faintly. After a long moment, he opened them, his gaze distant and troubled. The tendril is subtle, ancient. It is not a crude pipe, but a parasitic weave of corrupted magic, leeching from afar. It is familiar in its malevolence. His eyes suddenly snapped to hers, sharp and piercing. The ones who bound me, they were not just fearful. They were hiding something, protecting something from me or me from it. Or perhaps they were pawns in a much older game. He strode back towards her, his earlier menace now replaced by a grim, focused intensity. Your Aetherium Heart is not just failing, little keeper. It is being murdered, and your desperate ritual has not just awakened a prisoner. It has alerted the killer. As if to punctuate his words, a violent tremor shook the sanctum. The Aetherium Heart pulsed erratically, its light flaring a sickly, desperate green before dimming to a near-extinguished ember. A low, wailing sound echoed from the passages leading to the outside world, the cry of tormented spirits, or the sound of the veil itself tearing further. The true game, Elara realized with a chilling certainty, had just begun, and the storm scourge beside her was no longer just a potential savior or destroyer. He was now an unwilling, but perhaps essential, player. The wailing cry from the outer world pierced the sanctum's heavy air, a chorus of tormented spirits that seemed to claw at Elara's sanity. The ground still trembled with the aftershocks of the violent tremor, and the Aetherium Heart, their world's dying star, pulsed a sickly, faint green, its sapphire light almost entirely extinguished. Dust and small stones rained down from the ancient, carved ceiling. It's happening faster than I feared, Elara breathed, her hand pressed against the failing heart, feeling its cold, erratic pulse. Panic, sharp and cold, threatened to overwhelm her. Roric, however, seemed to draw strength from the chaos. The grim fury in his amber eyes solidified into a focused, predatory intensity. The storm within him, once a maelstrom of undirected rage, now had a target. The parasite grows bold, he snarled, his voice like the scrape of stone on stone. It senses the heart's vulnerability. It senses my awakening. He turned his gaze outward, towards the passages leading from the sanctum, as if he could see the invisible tendril of corrupt magic that was bleeding their world dry. Can you find it? Elara asked, pushing down her fear, her keeper's training taking over. The source of this drain. Roric closed his eyes, his great chest expanding as he drew in a deep breath. The air around him crackled, and the faint scent of ozone returned, stronger now, tinged with the smell of wet earth after a lightning strike. The tendril, it coils deep within the mountain's roots, but its origin point, it feels wrong. Not of this mountain, not of this world entirely. He opened his eyes, a dangerous light flaring within them. It is anchored nearby in a place where the veil was already thin, a wound from an older conflict. A place your ancestors should have cleansed or sealed forever. He looked at Elara, a silent demand in his eyes. There is no time to waste with rituals or pretty words now, Keeper. If we do not sever this leech, your heart will be a husk before the next moonrise, and both our worlds will unravel into the unmaking. Then we go, Elara said, her voice tight but resolute. She grabbed her staff, its Aetherium shard now little more than a faint glimmer. Do you know the way? My senses will guide me to the corruption, Roric stated. Your knowledge of these peaks may yet prove useful in navigating the physical paths without alerting whatever puppets this shadow master employs. He strode towards the sanctum's exit, his movements surprisingly swift for one so large, a barely contained avalanche of power. Elara hurried to keep pace. The journey out of the sanctum and into the higher passages of the Whisperwind Peaks was a terrifying revelation of how quickly the world was unraveling. The air, once crisp and clean, was now heavy, tainted with a cloying sweetness that spoke of decay. Patches of unnatural shadow clung to the walls, seeming to writhe and whisper. Eerie, disembodied voices echoed from unseen crevasses, the tormented cries of spirits unable to find purchase in the fraying veil, or perhaps something far worse trying to claw its way through. Roric moved with a grim purpose, his elemental senses guiding him through the labyrinthine tunnels. Several times, shadowy, vaguely humanoid shapes coalesced from the oppressive gloom, lunged at them from side passages, their touch promising an icy oblivion. Roric dispatched them with contemptuous ease, a sweep of his hand conjuring gusts of focused wind that tore them apart like smoke, or a stomp of his foot causing the very stone to erupt and crush them. Yet for everyone he destroyed, more seemed to gather in the periphery, their whispers growing bolder. They are symptoms, Roric growled after dissipating a particularly large cluster of shades. Flies drawn to a corpse, the true sickness lies deeper. Elara, though terrified, found a strange courage in his raw elemental power. He was a storm, yes, but for now that storm was directed outwards at the encroaching darkness. Her Aetherium shard, though weak, pulsed in sympathy with his energy, and she found she could anticipate the spirit manifestations a moment before they appeared, calling out warnings. Her knowledge of the mountain's layout helping them avoid dead ends or areas where the veil was particularly thin and dangerous. This way, she'd say, pointing down a less traveled path. The main passage ahead is prone to rockfalls, even in stable times. Or, there's an ancient wardstone near here. It might offer some brief respite or at least confuse these lesser spirits. Roric would grunt an acknowledgement, sometimes even altering his path based on her counsel. A fragile, unspoken understanding was being forged between them in the crucible of shared danger. He was the raw power, she the subtle guidance. As they climbed higher, nearing a region of the peaks known in Keeper lore as the Skytier Crags, a place notorious for its unstable magic and proximity to the spirit wilds, Roric suddenly stopped. He held up a hand, his head tilted, listening to something Elara could not hear. We are close to one of its anchors, he murmured, his voice a low vibration. The corruption here is potent. It twists the very stone, sings a song of madness to the earth spirits. He pointed towards a dark, narrow canyon ahead from which an almost visible wave of despair seemed to emanate. It lies through there. Before they could proceed, a section of the canyon wall ahead of them shimmered and a figure stepped out, blocking their path. It was humanoid, but its form was distorted, its limbs too long, its skin the color of bruised twilight, and its eyes twin pools of malevolent green fire. It wore archaic, decaying armor, and in its hand, it clutched a staff topped with a chunk of obsidian that pulsed with the same sickly, draining energy Elara had felt emanating from the parasitic tendril affecting the Aetherium Heart. So, the creature rasped, its voice like dry leaves skittering over bone, a sound that made Elara's skin crawl. The little keeper brings the caged storm to our doorstep. How convenient. The master will be pleased to have two such potent sources of energy to offer to the Unmaking. Roric let out a guttural snarl, stepping protectively in front of Elara. His own aura flared, lightning crackling around his fists. "Who is your master, Shadow Spawn, and what right have you to defile this mountain, to bleed this world?" The creature laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Right, we have the right of ages, Storm King, the right of a debt long unpaid. Your precious keepers in their arrogance thought they could seal away the inevitable. They imprisoned you, a force of natural entropy, because they feared the great unraveling you heralded. But the unraveling cannot be stopped, it can only be guided." It gestured with its obsidian staff. "My master is merely its harbinger, its most devoted servant. And soon, all that is will return to glorious, silent oblivion." Its green eyes fixed on Roric. "You, Storm Scourge, were meant to be a key to this, not an impediment. Your uncontrolled power was to be the first crack in the dam. Your jailers merely delayed the flood. But now, your awakened essence, combined with the heart's last reserves, it will accelerate the master's work beautifully." Elara felt a cold dread grip her. This was no mere raider of magic. This was a servant of some ancient, nihilistic entity, one that saw Roric's imprisonment not as a protection of balance, but as an interruption to a desired end. Her ancestors, had they truly understood what they were fighting against? The creature raised its staff. "Come, Storm Scourge, embrace your true purpose. Let the chaos you embody finally be free, or perish with this pathetic, dying world and its foolish little guardian." The air grew heavy, charged with an imminent, deadly confrontation. The fate of the Aetherium Heart, and perhaps Roric's own tortured destiny, hung precariously in the balance. The creature, wreathed in an aura of decay and malevolent green fire, wasted no more words. With a chilling shriek that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the air, it lunged, its obsidian staff arcing downwards, aimed not at Roric but at Elara. It clearly perceived her as the weaker link, the easier target to eliminate before dealing with the caged storm. Roric roared, a sound of pure elemental fury, and moved with a speed that belied his massive frame. He intercepted the blow not with his body but with a hastily conjured cyclone of wind and razor-sharp ice shards that erupted from the ground between Elara and their attacker. The obsidian staff struck the whirlwind, and a sickening sound, like tortured glass grinding against stone, echoed through the narrow canyon. The green fire of the staff sputtered, and the creature was forced back a step, its own eyes widening slightly in surprise at the raw, untamed power it faced. "You choose her over your true destiny, Storm Scourge," the servant of the Unmaking hissed, its voice dripping with contempt. "Over the glorious freedom of oblivion, your centuries of confinement have clearly addled your great mind." "My mind is my own, Shadow Fiend," Roric snarled, lightning now crackling along his arms, illuminating the grim determination etched on his face. "And my destiny is not to be dictated by a whispering void and its puppet." He stomped a foot, and the very rock beneath the creature buckled and cracked, throwing it off balance. Elara, her heart hammering, scrambled back, her Aetherium shard staff held before her like a fragile shield. The shard pulsed erratically, its faint light struggling against the oppressive darkness emanating from the obsidian staff. She knew she couldn't match these beings in raw power, but her mind, honed by years of study and her deep connection to the sanctum, raced for a solution, a weakness. The creature recovered quickly, its green eyes burning into Roric. "The Master offers you true liberation, an end to the pain of existence, to the futile cycle of creation and decay. Why cling to this dying world, this broken balance your keepers so pathetically failed to maintain?" It gestured with its staff again, and tendrils of black, viscous energy shot out, attempting to ensnare Roric's limbs. Roric met the tendrils with blasts of focused wind, shredding them before they could take hold, but Elara saw him wince as if their mere touch was corrosive. "This world lives," he retorted, his voice a thunderous boom that shook the canyon walls. "And while it draws breath, it is worth defending, if only to spite manipulative shadows like you and your pathetic master." His words, a raw declaration of defiance rather than any noble sentiment, struck a chord deep within Elara. He wasn't fighting for an ideal, not yet perhaps, but against an ancient enemy that sought to dictate his purpose, just as his original jailers had. His rage was now a weapon, honed and directed. "The staff," Elara cried out, her eyes fixed on the creature's weapon. "It's a conduit, like the tendril draining the heart. It's drawing power from the Unmaking, but it must have a focus point, a weakness." She remembered ancient texts on warding and sympathetic magic. The creature turned its fiery green gaze on her again. "The gnat has a sting, it seems. Silence her, scourge, and then we can discuss your ascension." "My ascension," Roric scoffed, "will be over your master's cinders." He gathered the storm around him, a swirling vortex of wind, ice, and crackling lightning. "Elara, if you see an opening, take it. This fiend's power is not its own." The battle was joined in earnest. Roric was a hurricane unleashed, his attacks brutal and elemental, shaking the very foundations of the Skytier crags. The servant of the Unmaking, though clearly powerful in its own right, was often forced onto the defensive, its obsidian staff creating shields of dark energy that cracked and splintered under Roric's relentless assault. Elara, staying on the periphery, watched intently, her mind racing. The creature's movements, while fast, seemed anchored, its power flowing from the staff. The staff itself, it pulsed with a rhythm that was subtly, sickeningly out of sync with the natural energies of the mountain, which she could now faintly perceive. "The stone of true sight, it may help you discern their nature," Torvin's earlier words from the previous story, but a similar artifact or innate ability could apply here, or it could be her keeper's intuition or the Aetherium shard's guidance. Elara clutched her staff, the Aetherium shard at its tip pulsing faintly. She focused her will not on attack, but on seeing, on understanding the flow of corrupt energy. And then she saw it, a slight waver, a flicker of instability at the point where the obsidian met the gnarled wood of the staff, a point where the dark energy seemed to pool. Arabic lam, Arabic het, Arabic thought, Arabic ha, Arabic khalif, Arabic Farsi yay before being directed. It was a flaw, a tiny imperfection. "Roric," she yelled over the din of the storm, "the staff, where the crystal meets the wood, it's a nexus." Roric, locked in a furious exchange of elemental blasts and shadowy tendrils, heard her. He couldn't afford to divert his main assault, but with a roar, he slammed his fist into the ground. A jagged spear of rock, imbued with his lightning, erupted from the canyon floor, not aimed at the creature, but at a precariously balanced overhang of loose stones just above it. The overhang groaned, then gave way, a cascade of boulders thundering down. The creature shrieked, forced to momentarily divert its attention and its staff's power to create a protective dome of shadow. In that instant of divided focus, the flaw Elara had seen in its staff pulsed erratically. Now Roric bellowed. It wasn't a physical attack Elara could make from her distance, but she poured all her focused intent, all her keeper's will, all her desperate hope for the Aetherium Heart into her own staff. She visualized the pure, balancing light of the Aetherium, however faint, striking that flaw. A thin beam of sapphire light, almost invisible in the raging elemental chaos, shot from the shard on her staff and struck the wavering nexus point on the obsidian weapon. It was like striking a dissonant chord in a finely tuned instrument. The obsidian staff shrieked, a sound that vibrated in Elara's teeth, and the green fire within it exploded outwards. The creature screamed, a sound of pure agony and disbelief, as its connection to its master's power was violently severed. The dark energy around it imploded, and its shadowy form began to unravel, dissolving into wisps of acrid smoke. "No, the master sees," it rasped, its form dissipating, its green eyes fading into nothingness. "The Unmaking is eternal." And then it was gone. Silence, heavy and profound, descended upon the canyon, broken only by Roric's harsh, ragged breathing and the distant, mournful sigh of the wind through the crags. Roric stood amidst the settling dust and lingering ozone, his storm slowly receding, leaving him looking weary but unbroken. He turned to Elara, his amber eyes, still crackling with residual lightning, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher: surprise, grudging respect, and something else, something deeper. You saw its weakness," he said, his voice rough. "Your little light, it broke its focus." Elara was trembling, the Aetherium shard in her staff now completely dark, its energy spent. "It was a flaw," she said, her voice shaky. "All things, even those of shadow, have them." Before they could say more, Roric stiffened, his head tilting as if listening. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "More coming," he said, his gaze turning towards the deeper recesses of the Skytier crags. "That was but a herald. The master's true power has not yet shown its face, and they know we are here. They know the heart is vulnerable." He looked at Elara, a new urgency in his eyes. "We have bought ourselves a moment, little keeper, but the true storm is about to break." The acrid smoke of the vanquished shadow spawn dissipated, leaving behind an unnerving silence in the Skytier crags. Elara leaned heavily against a jagged rock, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The Aetherium shard on her staff was cold and inert, its light extinguished, its comforting pulse gone. A wave of desolation, sharper than she'd expected, washed over her at the loss of that small connection to the heart. Roric stood, his massive chest heaving, the residual lightning in his amber eyes slowly fading to a grim, watchful glow. The power he had expended was considerable, yet the true threat, he knew, was far from over. That creature spoke of a master, he rumbled, his gaze sweeping the desolate, craggy landscape. And it was but a whisper of the true darkness that now gnaws at this mountain's soul. More are coming, Elara affirmed, straightening with a resolve that belied her exhaustion. The servant knew we were here. Its master will not be far behind, or will send something worse. She looked down at her darkened staff. My shard, its light is gone. I don't know if I can. The heart's light may be spent in that fragment, Keeper, Roric interrupted, his voice surprisingly devoid of scorn, but yours is not. You saw the flaw in that creature's weapon when I did not. Your sight is keen, your spirit unyielding. That is a weapon in itself. He paused, then made a decision that was clear in the sudden hardening of his jaw. We cannot return to the sanctum, not yet. To defend the heart, there is to wait for the wolves to surround the sheep. We must press on, find the source of this siphon the shadow spawn served, and cut it out before it bleeds the Aetherium dry. Elara's eyes widened. Press on? Into what? We don't even know what this master is. I know its nature, Roric said, a dark memory flickering in his eyes. It is the unmaking, the endless hunger that seeks to unravel all that is woven. It is the silence that yearns to swallow all songs. He looked at her then, a grim understanding passing between them. The creature spoke of my true purpose in aiding it. Perhaps my untamed power, my elemental chaos, was seen as a tool for that end by some. But no being, not even one born of storms, wishes for oblivion. We fight, Keeper. We fight for the song to continue, even if it is a song of a dying world. His words, raw and unexpectedly poignant, stirred something deep within Elara. This ancient, rage-filled prisoner was choosing to stand against the very entropy his nature might have once seemed to embody. He was choosing life. Their journey deeper into the skytier crags was a descent into a nightmare. The faint, discordant hum of the failing Aetherium Heart was now a constant throb in Elara's skull, but it was overlaid by a far more sinister vibration, the cold, deadening pulse of the Unmaking's influence. The very rock seemed to weep a black, oily residue. Corrupted nature spirits, no longer merely agitated but twisted into malevolent parodies of their former selves, stalked the shadows, their cries a mixture of pain and mindless aggression. Roric moved like a vengeful storm god, his power now a focused, cleansing fury. He did not just destroy these corrupted beings, he seemed to unravel their unnatural forms, returning their essence to the grieving earth with blasts of wind and lightning. But for everyone he dispatched, two more seemed to materialize from the thickening gloom. Elara, without her shard's light, felt terrifyingly vulnerable, yet she refused to be a burden. Her knowledge of the peaks, though often warped by the encroaching corruption, still helped them navigate. She learned to sense the subtle shifts in the unnatural energies, the places where the veil was thinnest, where the Unmaking's touch was strongest, often warning Roric of an ambush or a hidden spiritual trap. She found a resilience she hadn't known she possessed, her keeper's intuition sharpening in the face of overwhelming darkness. During one particularly brutal encounter with a pack of snarling, shadow-wreathed wolves, once proud mountain guardians, now twisted into servants of decay, Roric was momentarily overwhelmed, a shadowy tendril lashing out and catching his leg, causing him to roar in pain and fury. Without thinking, Elara threw herself forward, brandishing her inert staff like a club, and slammed it with all her might against the tendril. It recoiled, hissing, and Roric used the opening to unleash a devastating blast of lightning that vaporized the corrupted pack. He turned to her, his breathing harsh, a dark ichor seeping from the wound on his leg. "Foolish gnat," he growled, though there was no heat in it. "You could have been killed." "And you would have been ensnared," she retorted, her own heart pounding. "We are in this together, Storm Scourge, whether you like it or not." A strange look passed over his face, a mixture of annoyance, respect, and something akin to concern. He merely grunted and pushed himself upright, the wound on his leg already beginning to knit together with a faint, earthy glow, though it clearly still pained him. They pressed on, deeper into a vast, shattered caldera that felt like the epicenter of the mountain's pain. The air here was thick with the Unmaking's power, and in the center of the caldera, Elara saw it, a pulsating wound in the fabric of reality. It looked like a vortex of pure blackness, ringed with jagged, obsidian-like crystals that throbbed with stolen energy. This was the anchor point, the siphon. And before it stood not one, but three figures, taller and more formidable than the herald they had faced earlier, their forms wreathed in the same decaying green fire. They are channeling the heart's remaining essence directly into the void, Roric breathed, his voice tight with a mixture of rage and something that sounded like despair. If they complete their ritual, the heart will shatter and the unmaking will flood your world entirely. One of the three figures, its form more defined, almost regal in its corrupted majesty, turned its burning green eyes towards them. It was clearly the leader, perhaps a primary lieutenant of the unseen master. The storm scourge and the little keeper spark, its voice rasped, echoing across the caldera with chilling power. You have prolonged the inevitable, but you cannot prevent it. The age of silence is upon you. It raised a hand, and the ground around the black vortex began to tremble violently. The master has foreseen your interference. This place was prepared not just as a conduit, but as your tomb. Jagged spikes of obsidian erupted from the ground around Elara and Roric, attempting to impale or imprison them. Roric roared, stamping his foot, and a shockwave of elemental force shattered the nearest spikes, but more were rising. The three dark servants advanced, their power a palpable wave of despair and entropy. Elara knew this was a fight they might not win. Her staff was useless as a conduit of light. Roric was injured, and they were outnumbered by beings of considerable power. Yet, as she looked at Roric, standing defiant against the encroaching doom, his wild storm essence a beacon against the crushing darkness, she felt not terror but a fierce, burning resolve. She had to do something. The Aetherium Heart, her ancestors, her dying world, they all depended on it. She closed her eyes, ignoring the advancing threat, and reached inward, not for the memory of the shard's light, but for the deeper, more intrinsic connection she felt to the sanctum, to the very idea of balance her lineage had served for millennia. A faint, almost forgotten warmth began to glow deep within her, a spark of her own life force, her keeper's soul, yearning to connect, to protect. It was a tiny light against an overwhelming darkness, but it was hers. The lead servant of the Unmaking paused, its head tilting. What is this? A final, futile prayer, little keeper? Your gods are long dead or soon will be. It laughed, a sound like graves opening. But Roric saw the faint, new light beginning to emanate from Elara, a soft, pure silver that was utterly different from the Aetherium's sapphire glow. It was the light of unyielding spirit, and it gave him an idea, a desperate, terrible, and perhaps their only chance. The lead servant of the Unmaking advanced, its green fire eyes fixed on the faint, pure silver light now emanating from Elara. A flicker of defiance, how quaint. Your spirit will merely be a sweeter morsel for the master when he consumes this pathetic world. The other two servants fanned out, their shadowy forms radiating an icy despair that sought to extinguish Elara's nascent glow. Not while I draw breath, fiends, Roric roared, positioning himself between Elara and the advancing horrors. Lightning crackled around him, a furious, defensive storm, but Elara saw the strain in his stance, the lingering darkness from the herald's attack, the knowledge that his raw power alone might not be enough against three such entities and the vortex they commanded. Then he spoke to her, his voice a low, urgent rumble beneath the rising shriek of corrupted magic. Elara, your light, it is pure, untainted by the heart's current weakness. The Unmaking recoils from such purity. Can you shield me with it? Focus it through me? My storm can shatter their forms, but their master's draining touch, it poisons my essence even as I fight. His desperate plan, reckless and born of necessity, struck Elara with the force of a thunderclap. To become a conduit, a shield for his cataclysmic power while fending off the despair of the Unmaking, it was an impossible task. Yet as she looked at his wild amber eyes, now stripped of their ancient resentment and filled only with a desperate will to protect, she knew there was no other choice. Her own small light, combined with his immense storm, was their only hope. I will try, Roric, she called back, her voice ringing with a courage she didn't know she possessed. She closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in fierce concentration, pushing aside her fear, her exhaustion. She focused on the Aetherium Heart, not its current weakness, but its ideal state, vibrant, balanced, a beacon of pure life. She poured her own life force, her keeper's soul, into that vision, feeding the silver flame within her. The silver light around her intensified, blossoming into a radiant sphere that pulsed with a gentle, unwavering warmth. It was not the raw, elemental power of Roric, nor the borrowed light of her Aetherium staff, but something intrinsically hers, the light of unyielding spirit, of steadfast hope. Now, Roric, let your storm rage. With a guttural roar that was part fury, part agony, and part an entirely new note of ferocious hope, Roric unleashed the full, untamed cataclysm of his being. But this time, as the lightning tore from his fingertips and the winds howled around him, he drew upon Elara's silver light, weaving it into his own tempest. The storm that erupted was no longer just raw, chaotic energy. It was a cleansing fire, a purifying gale, the silver light giving it a coherence, a focused purity that seemed to sear the very essence of the Unmaking servants. The lead servant shrieked as the silver-laced lightning struck its shadowy form, not just dispersing it, but unmaking its corrupt essence. "No, this light, it burns. Master, they resist your eternal silence." The other two servants lunged, their attacks desperate, but Elara held her shield of silver light steady, an anchor in the maelstrom, while Roric's purified storm tore into them. It was a terrifying, awe-inspiring dance of destruction and protection. Elara felt her own life force draining at an alarming rate, the effort of maintaining such a pure, concentrated light almost unbearable. She felt Roric's immense power flowing through her, around her, a terrifying torrent that would have consumed her entirely without the strange harmony their combined essences had found. One by one, the servants of the Unmaking were torn apart, their shrieks fatting into the howling wind, their dark energy dissolving under the relentless assault of Roric's storm and Elara's unwavering light. Finally, only the pulsating black vortex remained, the siphon that was bleeding the Aetherium Heart dry. "The anchor, Roric, we must sever it," Elara gasped, her vision swimming, her silver light beginning to flicker. Roric, his own form now blazing with an almost unbearable mixture of storm energy and silver fire, turned his full fury upon the vortex. He gathered every ounce of his power, every particle of Elara's radiant shield into one colossal, focused blast. It struck the obsidian crystals, ringing the void, not with brute force, but with a resonant frequency that targeted their corrupt, unstable nature. The crystals shrieked, vibrated, then exploded in a shower of black, lifeless shards. The vortex itself, its anchor shattered, wavered, imploded, and with a final, soundless rush of despair, vanished. An absolute silence fell upon the caldera, broken only by the ragged gasps of Elara and Roric. The oppressive, draining presence was gone. The air, though still thin and cold, felt cleaner. Elara swayed, her silver light extinguishing completely, her strength utterly spent. Roric, his own storm receding, caught her as she fell, his arms, surprisingly gentle, cradling her against his heaving chest. He too was drained, his elemental fire dimmed to a low ember, but his eyes, as he looked down at her, held a profound, wondering gratitude. "You did it, little keeper," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Your light, it was the key." Deep within the mountain, in the distant sanctum, a change was occurring. With the parasitic siphon gone, the Aetherium Heart, though still terribly weak, pulsed once, then twice, with a clear, pure sapphire light. It was faint, a mere whisper of its former glory, but it was alive. It was fighting. It had been given a chance. A soft, healing warmth, almost imperceptible, began to spread outwards from it, a sigh of relief from the wounded mountain. Elara, nestled against Roric, felt that faint warmth, that subtle shift in the world's balance, and managed a weak smile. "We did it," she echoed, before darkness claimed her. When she awoke, it was to the gentle light of dawn filtering into a small, sheltered cave, not her prison in the sanctum. A warm fur was draped over her, and a small, smokeless fire crackled nearby. Roric sat by the entrance, his back to her, gazing out at the slowly healing peaks. He looked different. The raw elemental fury was still a part of him, but it was tempered now, overlaid with a deep weariness, and a quiet, thoughtful peace she had never seen in him before. "You're awake," he said without turning. His voice was softer now, the grinding edges smoothed away. "How long?" Elara began, her own voice a dry rasp. 3 days, he replied. "The mountain sleeps a healing sleep, the heart it holds. It will take time, much time, for it to recover its full strength, but the draining has stopped. The Unmaking's immediate threat to this isle has been repelled." He finally turned to look at her, and in his amber eyes, Elara saw the truth of their shared ordeal, the depth of the bond forged in fire and sacrifice. The Chico Malo was still there, the wild storm, but now she also saw the vulnerable, ancient spirit who had chosen life over oblivion, alliance over solitude. "The Master of Unmaking is still out there, I presume," Elara said quietly. Roric nodded. "Such an entity is not so easily vanquished. It will bide its time. But Ethel, this world, it has been given a reprieve, because of you, Elara." "Because of us, Roric," she corrected gently. A slow smile, the first true, unreserved smile she had ever seen from him, touched his lips, transforming his harsh features into something breathtakingly noble. Yes, us. In the months that followed, a new balance began to assert itself. Elara, with Roric by her side, became more than just the Aetherium Heart's keeper. She became its healer, her innate spiritual light, now fully awakened, working in harmony with Roric's grounded elemental strength to slowly nurture the relic back to vitality. Roric, no longer a prisoner of rage or stone, found a new purpose as Ethel's protector, his storm now a shield against the lingering shadows, his ancient wisdom a guide for the recovering land. Their alliance, born of desperation, had blossomed into a partnership of profound trust and a love as wild and enduring as the mountain they guarded. The path ahead was long, the threat of the Unmaking a distant shadow on the horizon, but for the first time in centuries, the Aetherium Heart beat with a steady, hopeful rhythm, and the worlds it protected knew a fragile, precious peace. The Relic Guardian and the Alpha Prisoner had found their true purpose, not in ancient laws or bitter resentments, but in each other and in the enduring song of life itself.